For years, I've loved the quiet solitude of trucking. Some drivers struggle with endless miles of road and empty views. But to me, it's always felt like peace. It's just you, your truck, and the highway. No one to bother you, plenty of space to think. That's how it usually goes. Anyway, but this one night, driving deep in Nevada, on a highway so deserted there wasn't a living thing in sight, things took a turn. It was the kind of road where you could drive for hours and never see another car, let alone a town. Around midnight, I started noticing a problem with my rig. A soft sputtering sound came from the engine, barely audible at first, but enough to grab my attention. My dashboard showed nothing wrong, no warning lights, no signs of trouble, yet that quiet, rhythmic cough continued, as if the engine was fighting to keep going. The next truck stop was still 2 hours away, but I told myself I'd make it. I was wrong. About 20 minutes later, the sputtering turned into a violent stutter, and then, without warning, the engine simply died. My big truck slowly glided to a stop on the roadside, the engine's comforting hum replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. I just sat there, clutching the steering wheel. I always took perfect care of my truck. It had never failed me. I tried the key, hoping it was just a momentary glitch, but all I got was that dreadful empty clicking sound of a dead engine. Fantastic. I turned on my hazard lights and climbed out. The desert night air, usually cool, pressed in with an unnatural, stifling warmth. I popped the hood and grabbed my flashlight, casting its beam over the engine. I'm no expert mechanic, but I know enough to spot obvious issues. Everything looked fine, no visible leaks, no signs of damage. Still, something felt wrong. No matter how many times I tried, the truck wouldn't start. I grabbed the CB radio, breaker 19. Anyone out there? I'm stranded on the highway. Rig's dead. Anyone nearby? My voice echoed in the silent cab, but only static answered. I tried again, louder, a growing unease tightening in my chest. Come on. Someone has to be out there. I could use some help. Nothing. No distant crackle of another voice. No sign of another driver. Just pure static. I stood there for a minute, the immense quiet pressing down on me. My phone had no signal, and the nearest town was far too distant to walk. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no one to call and no way to fix my truck. An eerie shiver crawled up my spine. That feeling you get when you know something is deeply wrong, but you can't quite name it. I was about to get back into the cab when I saw a pair of headlights in the distance, faint but growing. A wave of relief washed over me. Maybe it was another trucker, someone who could help, or at least give me a lift to the next stop. As the vehicle got closer, I could see it was an old, battered pickup truck. It pulled to a stop a few yards ahead of my rig, and a man stepped out. He was tall and slender, his clothes worn and dusty, as if he'd been traveling for days. Something about him immediately put me on guard. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. For a second, I didn't know how to respond. He felt off, but what choice did I have? I was stranded, and he was the only person around. "Yeah, my truck broke down," I managed, forcing a smile. "I'm not sure what the problem is. It just quit." The man nodded slowly, his eyes flickering toward my rig. "Mind if I take a look?" I hesitated. What could I say? No. I was stuck, and this guy was my only option. "Sure, go ahead." He walked over to the truck with a strange, unnerving slowness, and my unease deepened. He didn't ask about the truck, didn't seem interested in the engine at all. He just stood there, peering under the hood, his back to me. The whole situation felt wrong, like I was missing something obvious. The hair on my arm stood up, and I took a step back, trying to create some distance. The man stayed under the hood, longer than seemed necessary. He wasn't moving much, just standing there, his head slightly tilted, as if he was listening to something. I shifted my weight, feeling more and more uncomfortable. "See anything wrong?" I asked, trying to break the heavy silence. He didn't answer right away. remaining still as a statue. When he finally turned to face me, he said, "Looks like you're in a bit of trouble." His voice was low, almost amused. "But I can help. There's a place not far from here, just off the highway. I've got some tools there. We can tow your rig and get you fixed up." My gut screamed at me to refuse. There was something in his voice, something in his gaze, that felt utterly wrong. Like he wasn't offering help at all, but something else, something much darker. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll just wait for a tow," I said, trying to sound calm. "Shouldn't be too long before someone comes by." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other in the dim glow of my truck's headlights. He asked, taking a step closer. "It's a long way to the next town. Could be hours before anyone else comes through." I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. Something was very wrong, and I knew it. But I couldn't afford to show fear. "Not yet, I'm sure," I said, forcing another smile. "Thanks for stopping though." The man stared at me for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating as if weighing his options. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his truck. But the way he did it, slow and deliberate, made it clear this wasn't over. I watched as the man climbed into his truck, but he didn't drive away. He just sat there, his engine idling. I backed up toward the cab of my rig, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the door handle. I climbed in and locked the doors. The man's truck still hadn't moved. He was just sitting there, waiting. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that he'd leave soon, but the chilling feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It felt like he was planning something, like he was waiting for the right moment. Minutes passed, then an hour. The man's truck still hadn't moved. My palms were slick with sweat, my nerves fraying with every ticking second. Suddenly, the man's truck lurched forward, pulling up alongside my rig. My stomach twisted with dread as I saw his silhouette through the window, his face illuminated by the dim glow of his dashboard light. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that gave me an eerie, chilling feeling. He rolled down his window and leaned out. "You sure you don't want that help, buddy?" I didn't answer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I reached for my phone again, hoping against hope that I'd somehow gotten a signal. But the screen was still blank. The man got out of his truck, leaving the engine running, and started walking toward my door. My hands fumbled for the keys, desperately trying to start the engine, but the truck still wouldn't turn over. As he drew closer, panic surged inside me. That same slow, deliberate walk that had set off alarms in my head from the start. I grabbed a tire iron from under the seat, gripping it tightly in my trembling hands. If he tried to get in, I'd have to defend myself. There was no other option. He reached the door and knocked hard. "Open up," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Let's have a talk." I didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat there, clutching the tire iron, my pulse roaring in my ears. He knocked again, harder this time. "Don't make this difficult." The truck's engine still wouldn't start. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do, but there were no good options. I was trapped. Then, just as he reached for the door handle, I heard the sound of another engine in the distance. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, and I felt a surge of hope. Another truck was approaching, its lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The man froze, his hand still on the door handle, his eyes narrowing as he looked over his shoulder at the approaching vehicle. For a moment, I thought he was going to try to break in anyway, but then he turned and walked back to his truck. Without another word, he climbed in, slammed the door and peeled out, speeding off into the night. The other trucker pulled up behind me. I was too shaken to get out at first, too stunned by what had just happened, but eventually I forced myself to step out, to wave down the drive. He was a fellow long-haul trucker, just passing through. When I told him what had happened, he offered to stay with me until a tow truck arrived. I don't know how much time passed before help finally showed up, but the man never came back. I've been driving trucks for years, but that night was the closest I've ever come to real danger. The man on the highway may have seemed like he was offering help, but I know now that his intentions were anything but good. And to this day,
Whenever I'm driving through a deserted stretch of highway, I keep my eyes on the road, and I never, ever stop for strangers. Sometimes the people who offer help are the ones you need to fear the most. For nearly 20 years, I've been on the road as a long-haul truck. You get used to the quiet life, the long hours, and the isolation that comes with it. I've driven through every kind of weather, on roads that seem to stretch forever, and into towns so remote they barely existed on a map. But in all those years, there's only one particular night that continues to haunt my dreams. I was on a cross-country haul from Arizona to Georgia. It was late October, and I had just crossed the New Mexico border when I realized I needed to pull over for the night. I'd been driving for almost 11 hours straight, and my eyelids felt heavy. You know the feeling. Your brain starts to slow down, and before you know it, you're nodding off at the wheel. Not safe. I wasn't near any big truck stops, just a long empty stretch of highway, with nothing in sight. I figured I'd keep an eye out for the next rest stop, and pull over there for a few hours of sleep. It wasn't ideal, but I've done it plenty of times before. Then I saw the sign, rest stop 2 miles. Perfect timing. I slowed down, took the exit, and pulled off the highway. As I rolled into the rest stop, I could immediately tell something was off. The place was practically deserted. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot, both parked far away, their cabs dark, with no signs of life inside. The rest stop itself wasn't much to look at. Just a few parking spaces, a couple of picnic tables, and an old run-down restroom building. There were no lights except for a single flickering street lamp near the entrance, casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. I parked my rig near the middle of the lot, not too close to the other trucks, but not too far either. Something about the isolation didn't sit right with me, but I figured I was just being overly cautious. I cut the engine and sat there for a minute, letting the silence of the desert settle around me. It was unnervingly quiet. No wind, no crickets, no distant hum of traffic, just a dead, stifling silence. I grabbed my thermos and took a long swig of coffee, hoping it would shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. But it didn't. After a few minutes, I decided to stretch my legs and use the restroom before trying to sleep. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the cab. The night air was cold and the ground crunched under my boots. As I walked toward the restroom building, the restroom was in worse shape than I expected. The door hung slightly off its hinges, and the walls were covered in faded graffiti. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Musty, damp, like the place hadn't been cleaned in ages. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. I pointed my flashlight at the cracked tiles and peeling paint, trying to find the least disgusting stall to use. As I was doing my business, I heard it. The sound of footsteps, soft at first, then louder, like someone was walking slowly around the building, circling it. I froze. The rest stop had been empty when I pulled in. No other cars had arrived, and the trucks parked at the far end were still dark and silent. So who the hell was walking around? I quickly finished up and stepped out of the stall. I listened carefully, straining to hear, but the footsteps had stopped. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was the wind, or an animal, or something else. I opened the door, shining my flashlight around the lot. Nothing. Just the same eerie silence and the dim glow of the street lamp flickering in the distance. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves, and made my way back to my truck. I was halfway back to my rig when I saw him, a man standing by one of the picnic tables. I could barely make him out in the dark. He stood with his hands stuffed into the pockets of a heavy jacket, his face hidden by a pulled-up hood. I stopped dead, my heart skipping a beat. He hadn't been there when I'd gotten out of my truck. I was sure of it. I hadn't seen or heard anyone else when I pulled in. So where had he come from? I kept my flashlight trained on him, but he didn't move. He just stood there completely still. I couldn't make out his face, but something about his posture, the way he stood there like he was waiting for something, made my skin crawl. I forced myself to keep walking, not wanting to show any sign of fear. As I got closer to my truck, I looked over my shoulder. The man hadn't moved. He was still standing there watching me. I climbed into the cab, locking the doors behind me, and sat there for a moment. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was nothing. Just some guy passing through. Another trucker maybe. But why hadn't I seen him pull in? And why was he just standing there? I peeked out of the window, but the man was gone. I tried to relax, telling myself everything was fine, that I was just tired. I lay down on the bed at the back of the cabin, figuring I'd try to get some sleep, but the unease I felt earlier had only grown worse. I couldn't stop thinking about the man by the picnic table, the way he'd been standing there watching me from the shadow. I turned off the interior light and lay in the darkness of the cab, listening to the silence outside. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that I was being watched. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the man's silhouette standing motionless in the dark. I don't know how long I lay there, but it must have been close to an hour. I was starting to drift off when I heard it again. Footsteps, this time right outside my truck. I shot up. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it through the window, but there was no one there, just the empty parking lot, the flickering street lamp, and the endless blackness of the desert. The footsteps continued, circling the truck now, slow, deliberate. My stomach twisted with fear. This wasn't my imagination. Someone, or something was out there. I listened as the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but the next sound I heard wasn't footsteps. It was a knock, soft at first, almost polite, like someone tapping gently on the door. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then the knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I leaned forward, trying to peer through the window without making it obvious, but I couldn't see anyone, just the edge of the truck bathed in the dim light of the street lamp. Then, from the other side of the cab, I heard it again. Another knock, like someone, or more than one person, was tapping on both sides of the truck at once. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling as I dialed 911, but there was no signal. I cursed under my breath, knowing how remote the area was. Of course there was no service out here. The knocks continued, more aggressive. Whoever was out there wasn't just messing with me. They wanted in. I debated getting out, trying to scare them off, but something told me that was a bad idea. There was more than one person out there. I could feel it, and they were waiting for me to make a move. I don't know what made me do it, but I reached over and slammed my fist against the horn. The loud blare echoed through the empty rest stop. For a moment, the knocking stopped. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, listening for any sign of movement. Then I heard it. A car engine, headlights illuminating the darkness, as another vehicle pulled into the lot, its bright beams sweeping across the pavement and illuminating the shadows that had been lurking outside my truck. 3 figures stood there, scattered around my rig. They were all wearing dark clothes, their faces hidden by hoods. When the car's lights hit them, they froze, then quickly scattered, disappearing into the darkness of the desert. I didn't waste any time. I turned the key, started the engine, and peeled out of that rest stop as fast as I could. My heart was racing, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I drove straight through the night, not stopping until I hit a well-lit truck stop a few hours later. Even then I didn't feel safe. I couldn't stop thinking about the figures knocking on my doors. I told a few other truckers what had happened, and one of them told me he'd heard rumors about that rest stop. Apparently it wasn't the first time something like that had happened. People had gone missing, trucks found abandoned, but there was never any proof, just stories. I never stop at rest stops that remote anymore. You never know who or what might be waiting for you in the dark. And the worst part, I still hear those knocks sometimes. I've been a trucker for over 20 years, and let me tell you, I've seen some strange things out on the road. Long stretches of highway at night can play tricks on your mind. Sometimes you see shadows that aren't really there, or your tired eyes start to blur reality. You get used to the isolation, the endless miles of nothingness. But there was one night, one stretch of road, that I'll never forget. It was a late November night, and I was hauling a load through Texas, heading down a remote highway that cut through miles of empty desert. The road was as straight as an arrow, with no towns for miles, no gas stations, no rest stops, just pitch black on either side of me. I usually don't mind the solitude, It gives me time to think, to clear my head. But that night, something felt off. The air was heavy, the kind of weight that sits on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. My headlights illuminated nothing but the cracked asphalt in front of me. I looked at the clock on my dash. 11. I still had a few hours to go before I'd planned to pull over for the night. But I wasn't feeling tired. There was an uneasy energy in the air that kept me alert. Like my body knew something was coming before my mind.
It must have been another hour of driving when I first noticed the car. At first, it was just a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror, far in the distance. I didn't think much of it. It's rare to see other vehicles out on roads like these at that time of night, but it's not unheard of. Maybe another trucker, maybe someone driving cross-country. I kept an eye on it, though. It's a habit I picked up over the years. Knowing what's behind you is just as important as watching what's in front, but the car didn't seem to be gaining on me. It stayed back, keeping the same distance. After about 20 minutes of this, I started to get a little suspicious. I'd been driving at a steady pace, around 65 miles per hour, and any car behind me should have caught up by now, or at least gotten closer. But this one stayed exactly where it was. I did my best to dismiss the discomfort growing in the pit of my stomach. I told myself it was just some guy who didn't want to pass, maybe nervous about being out here alone. Still, I couldn't help looking back at the mirror every few minutes, waiting for the car to either speed up or fall behind. But it didn't. It just stayed there. Another 30 minutes passed, and the car hadn't budged. My palms were starting to sweat, and I couldn't focus on the road ahead of me. All I could think about were those headlights in my mirror. My heart started beating faster, even though nothing had really happened yet. But something deep down was telling me that this wasn't normal. This wasn't just some guy driving through the desert at night. There was something wrong. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'd been through worse. I'd driven through blizzards, nearly jackknifed on icy roads, and been stuck in dead zones where I couldn't get help for hours. This was just my imagination, I told myself, but no matter how many times I tried to push the fear aside, it kept creeping back in, like a cold hand gripping the back of my neck. I turned up the radio, hoping to drown out my thoughts, but all I could find was static. Of course, out here, stations are few and far between. I switched it off and tried to focus on the road, but that damn car was still in my mirror, a pair of unwavering eyes that never blinked. I'd had enough. I decided I was going to slow down and let the car pass me. If this guy was just messing with me, I'd call him out. If not, maybe he'd finally get the hint and go around me. I eased off the gas and watched the car in the mirror, expecting it to get closer, but it didn't. I slowed down more, down to 50 miles per hour, then 40. The car stayed exactly where it was, not getting closer, not falling behind. My heart was racing now. This wasn't possible. I slowed down even more, until I was barely crawling along at 30 miles per hour. But still the headlights in the distance didn't move. It was like they were glued to that spot in the mirror. What the hell was going on? I pressed the brakes, bringing my truck to a complete stop in the middle of the road. I sat there staring into the rearview mirror, waiting for the car to catch up. But when I looked again, it was gone. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no car, just darkness stretching out for miles. I leaned forward, squinting into the mirror, trying to see if the car had turned off, or maybe pulled over somewhere I hadn't noticed. But there was nothing. A car couldn't just disappear like that. Not out here on this dead straight road, with no turn-offs, no exits, no place to go. I must have missed something. I had to. I threw the truck into gear and started moving again. Faster this time. My hands were slick with sweat, and I could barely keep my grip on the wheel. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe the guy had turned off his lights, or maybe I just imagined the whole thing.
But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I had a nagging feeling that something was very wrong. I'd been driving for about 15 minutes when the headlights reappeared in my mirror. My stomach dropped. The car was back. Same distance, same exact spot in my rear view. It was like nothing had happened, like it had never disappeared at all. My hands trembled on the wheel, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just stop again, not with whatever was happening behind me, and speeding up didn't seem to make a difference either. I tried to stay calm, tried to focus on the road ahead, but every few seconds my eyes flicked back to the mirror, watching those headlights like there was some kind of predator stalking me. I thought about pulling over at the next gas station, but there wasn't one for another 40 miles, and something told me stopping wouldn't help. That's when the car started moving. I blinked, not sure if I was seeing things right, but no, it was getting closer now, slowly at first, but then picking up speed. My heart slammed against my ribs as I watched it approach. It wasn't swerving, wasn't flashing its lights, just coming straight for me, steady and fast. I floored it, speeding down the highway at 70-80 miles per hour. But no matter how fast I went, the car kept gaining on me. It was like something out of a nightmare. The headlights filled my rear view, so bright I had to squint to see the road in front of me. Then the car was right on me, so close I could almost see the shape of it in my mirrors. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just knew I had to get away. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the car veered off into the darkness, disappearing from my mirror. I didn't stop until I hit the next gas station, a small decaying place, the sort that looks like it's been untouched since the 70s. But I didn't care. I pulled into the lot, jumped out of my truck, and ran inside, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. The attendant looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I just needed to be around people, to feel like I wasn't alone anymore. After a few minutes of pacing, I told the attendant what had happened. He just shrugged and gave me a knowing look. "You're not the first trucker to see something strange on that road," he said. "Happens more than you'd think. Some folks say there's a haunted car that follows drivers out there, but it never actually does anything. Just scares the hell out of you." I didn't know what to say. Haunted? That couldn't be it. But then again, I couldn't explain what had happened either. I stayed at that gas station for an hour, long enough for my heart to stop racing, and my hands to steady. I didn't want to get back on the road, but I didn't have a choice. Eventually I forced myself to climb back into my truck and keep driving. I haven't taken that route since. I avoid it like the plague, because no matter how much I try to tell myself it was just my imagination, there's a part of me that knows whatever was out there that night, it wasn't normal, and I'm not sticking around to find out what happens if it catches you. I like to think of myself as a person who values practicality. Working long-haul trucking for as many years as I have, you learn to deal with things head-on. Flat tires, bad weather, endless nights on empty highways. But there was one night, one stretch of road, that still haunts me to this day. It was about 6 years ago, and I was driving through the Appalachian Mountains. I'd been on the road for hours, running a late-night haul from North Carolina up into West Virginia. The job was simple enough: pick up the load, drive through the mountains, and deliver by morning. I'd done the route a dozen times before, and I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. But that night, let's just say something was different. The weather had taken a turn for the worse earlier in the evening. A thick fog rolled in, the kind that clings to the ground and makes it feel like you're driving through a dream or a nightmare. My headlights cut through the mist, but barely visibility was terrible. I could only see a few feet ahead of me, the winding road, disappearing into the fog, like it was leading me somewhere I wasn't supposed to go. Still, I pressed on. I had a delivery window to make, and I wasn't about to let a little fog slow me down. I tried to focus on the road, but something about the silence felt oppressive. It wasn't just the lack of sound, it was the way the fog seemed to swallow everything around me. leaving me completely isolated. It must have been around 2 when I first heard it. A whisper, so soft it nearly blended with the sound of my truck's engine. At first I figured it was just my mind messing with me. Long hours on the road can play tricks on your head, make you hear and see things that aren't really there. But the whisper didn't go away. I turned my head slightly, listening, trying to make out the sound. It was soft, like someone was murmuring right behind me. I looked into the back of the cab, but of course there was no one. I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired, that I needed a break. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. It wasn't just in my head. It was like it was inside the truck with me, lingering just behind my ears, slipping through the cracks of my sanity. I turned up the heat, hoping the warmth would wake me up a bit. The fog outside was thick as ever, and I couldn't afford to let my mind wander. But the whisper didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone. It was cold, almost angry. My skin prickled with unease. I tried to focus on the road, to push the sound out of my mind, but it was like trying to ignore a persistent itch. It was there, nagging at the back of my brain, making it impossible to think about anything else. About an hour later, things started to get worse. I was rounding a sharp curve when I caught movement in my rearview mirror. Just a flicker of something, a shadow disappearing into the fog behind me. I nearly slammed on the brakes, my heart jumping into my throat. For a moment, I thought it was an animal or another vehicle, but when I looked again, there was nothing there, just the road stretching behind me, empty and swallowed by the mist. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. You're seeing things, I told myself. You're tired, and the fog's playing tricks on your eyes. But that explanation didn't sit right with me. The shadow had been too distinct, too human. And it wasn't just that I'd seen something. It was the feeling that came with it. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I checked the rearview mirror again, my eyes scanning the empty road behind me. Nothing, just fog and darkness. I gripped the wheel tighter and tried to shake off the feeling, but it wouldn't go away. By the time 4th a.m. rolled around, I was a mess of nerves. The whispering hadn't stopped, and the shadows in my mirror had become more frequent. Every time I looked back, I saw something, just for a split second, a figure standing in the fog, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I was starting to think I was losing my mind. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. Maybe the fog, the late hour, and the stress of the job were pushing me to the edge. But then something happened that I couldn't explain away. I was driving down a long stretch of road, the fog so thick I could barely see past the hood of my truck. The whispering had grown louder, almost frantic, but I still couldn't make out the words. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see another shadow. When I saw it, a face, I slammed on the brakes, my truck screeching to a stop in the middle of the road. My chest tightened, my heart hammering, while I stared at the mirror, struggling to catch my breath. There, in the back seat of my cab, was a face, pale, expressionless and cold. It stared at me through the reflection, its eyes dark and hollow. Terror gripped me, freezing me in place. I whipped around, expecting, no, dreading to see someone sitting behind me. But the back seat was empty. I sat there for a moment, my heart thudding in my ears, trying to process what I had just seen. There was no way someone could have gotten in the truck without me noticing. No way they could just disappear like that. I forced myself to breathe, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I didn't want to look in the mirror again. I didn't want to see that face. But I had to know. Slowly, I looked up at the rear view. Nothing, just the back seat, empty as ever. But that didn't make me feel any better. I could still feel it, whatever it was lingering in the cab with me, watching, waiting. I needed to get out of there. I needed to keep driving, to put as many miles between me and this cursed road as possible. I started the truck again, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, refusing to look in the mirror, no matter how much I wanted to. The fog was still thick, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from whatever had found me in the mountain. Then the radio crackled to life. At first I thought it was just static, but as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't. There was a voice in the static, distorted and faint, like someone was trying to speak to me from miles away, and they were saying my name. Marie. I froze. The voice was low, guttural, like it was coming from deep within the earth. I reached out to turn off the radio, but before I could, the voice spoke again. Marie, don't look back. I yanked my hand away from the dial. I felt like I was going to be sick. The voice was still there, repeating the same phrase over and over again, each time growing louder, more desperate. Don't look back. I didn't want to. I knew that if I looked in the mirror again, I'd see something I couldn't unsee. But the voice, it was compelling me, pulling me toward the rear view, daring me to defy its warning. My hand trembled as I reached up, my fingers brushing the edge of the mirror. I had to know. I had to. Slowly, I adjusted the mirror, just enough to catch a glimpse of the back seat, and there it was again. The face, just staring at me. I slammed the mirror back into place and floored the gas pedal, speeding down the fog-covered road at a dangerous pace. But I didn't care. I needed to get away. The voice on the radio had grown louder now, a cacophony of distorted sounds, all screaming the same thing. Don't look back. I didn't. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, even as I felt the cold presence in the cab grow stronger, as if the face was moving closer, inching toward me, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the wheel. I had no idea where I was, no idea if I was still on the right road. All I could see was fog and darkness, the world outside my truck disappearing into the mist. The voice on the radio crackled, sputtered, then went silent. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my engine and my ragged breathing. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the fog lifted. I kept going for hours, until I made it to the next town. I pulled into a diner parking lot, my hands still trembling as I cut the engine. I sat there for a long time, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself that what had just happened wasn't real. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get rid of the sense that it truly was. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, or would believe me. A ghostly face in my rear view, a voice on the radio warning me not to look back. It sounded insane even to me, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And to this day, I haven't driven through those mountains again, because no matter how much time passes, I can't forget that face. I can't forget the way it stared at me. I still hear the whisper sometimes, late at night when I'm alone on the road. Don't look back. And I never do. If these stories sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to hit that like button and share the fear with your friend.
Subscribe for more terrifying stories from the darkest corners of the road. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. You won't want to. Stay safe out there, because sometimes what's lurking in the shadows is all too real. Thanks for watching, and drive carefully. I'll see you in the next nightmare.